Well, we didn't finish Romans chapter 9 last time, so today we're going to do that. Romans 9 and 10 are very, very much related to each other. In going through the epistles that we've been doing in this class, usually each chapter has some very distinctive changes from the chapter before. Not so much in this case. Romans 9 and 10 are almost one thought. You know, except for the length of them, you can include them as one chapter because you're going to see a lot of repetition here. So there's really, I'm only going to have time to finish 9, I think, today. But if I finish early, I might just go right into 10 because they are so related. All right. All right. So I'm going to spend a little bit of time talking about the primary theme of Romans 9 and 10 is what happened to the Israelites. Paul is writing to the Romans, and some of the Romans are Jews. Many of the Romans are Roman. I mean, they're Italian, and they're not Jewish. And you think about all this history of the prophets through Moses, God using the nation of Israel, and now here comes the Messiah through the nation of Israel. And why hasn't Israel accepted this? Okay, what happened? This is a big okay? I mean, Jesus was Jewish, and so the question is, if this stuff is so great, why are you telling us about it? Why haven't your own people adopted it? And so a lot of time is spent discussing what went wrong. Now, one thing that Paul says over and over again is he refers back to the Old Testament prophets, and he says, you know what? This was actually predicted. Now this goes back actually to what you were saying about that verse where it says, Jacob I loved, Esau I hated. Okay? And it wasn't really talking, even though as an individual, God didn't, I seriously doubtful that God said, I just arbitrarily I think that the firstborn, I'm not going to like this one, I'm going to like the secondborn, and I don't know what they're going to do, I'm just going to throw my preference on the first one. Probably not. Okay, God, being outside of time, knows the summation of a person's heart. He knows the summation of their choices. And it wasn't, I don't think that he hated Esau as a person so much, but what he stood for. Okay, the certain attitude. But not only that, anybody know what nation came out of Esau? Yeah, Edomites, exactly. And the Edomites and the Israelites, they had a lot of conflict one with the other. Okay, now Jacob and Esau started out as friends and everything, but things digressed over time between the Edomites and the Israelites. The Edomites, though they were of Abraham, were not the chosen people of God. Okay, they chose to follow the gods of Canaan. Okay, and consequently, they were not accepted. All right, and so here in Malachi it says, I have loved you, says the Lord, but you say, how have you loved us? Was not Esau Jacob's brother, declares the Lord? Yet I loved Jacob, but I have hated Esau, and I have made his mountains a desolation and appointed his inheritance the jackals of the wilderness. Though Edom says, we have been beaten down, but we'll return and build up the ruins. Thus says the Lord of hosts, they may build, but I will tear down, and men will call them the wicked territory, and the people toward whom the Lord is indignant forever. Okay, what happened to the Edomites? They're no more. Okay, the Israelites are still going strong. The Edomites came to nothing. All right, and that got basically they were not perpetuated. So the point being that when he says Jacob I loved, Esau I hated, I don't think it was the individual so much as what he stood for and the nation that would come about and turn their back on the God of Israel. Okay. All right. Now, going back to Romans chapter 9 here, starting in 14, because this is where the idea comes up. It's like, okay, in situations like this where you have Pharaoh and God hardening the heart of Pharaoh, and situations where Jacob and Esau and God using people who reject him as tools to say, don't do this. Sometimes when people make those bad choices, they still get used by God. And so he comes down to the point where since God is doing everything, since he is making these choices, it's not fair. If God is choosing our fate, then how does anybody get credit for the good they do? And how can you blame somebody for the bad they do if God is choosing their destiny? Okay? So he goes, is that grounds for complaining that God is unfair? Not so fast, please. God told Moses, I'm in charge of mercy. I'm in charge of compassion. Compassion doesn't originate in our bleeding hearts or moral sweat, but in God's mercy, which is just the verse that Lyle just read there. The same point was made when God said to Pharaoh, I picked you as a bit player in this drama of my salvation power. All we're saying is that God has the first word, initiating the play our part for good or ill. Okay? Are you going to object? So how can God blame us for anything since he's in charge of everything? If the big decisions have already been made, what say do we have in it? Okay, and this is a question that gets brought up all the time. Now what's interesting here is it's not only brought up theologically. Even the atheists bring this up. Because the evangelical atheists also believe in predestination, believe it or not. Okay? Evangelical atheists, they claim that since we are the product of naturalistic mechanisms, starting with evolution and evolving to who you are now, your genes and your environment, basically you had no choice but to become who you are. Because your brain is the process of random chemicals bouncing around in your head. Therefore, you have no other way of responding to your environment because it's predetermined biochemically. So there is no free will. Okay? There is no free will. Now, how would you respond to that? Because biblically, there's some evidence that free will is hindered with because God is in charge of everything. And then you got that whole biological thing which determines a lot of things. So where is free will then? How much free will do you have?
Is that where the permissive will and
God? Yes, the issue of the permissive will versus the perfect will. Yeah, that is where that comes in. And that, yeah, you have, when we come to those four, a lot of things are automatic. There are a lot of automatic things that you are going to do, and they're right. Biologically, that's what you're going to do. But not just that, okay? The thing is this. It's not just the biology, it's also the things that happen to you. If you endure a great amount of distress as a child before you're 18, something called epigenetic phenomena takes place, and it literally alters your gene expression. And so you become altered, and you become a different person genetically by the things that happen to you. If you're in a nurturing environment, that also causes epigenetic things. And so it's not just your genes that determine what you do, it's also your environment as a child that determines what you're going to do. But as you get older, the choices that you make determine the choices that you're going to make. It's called the kindling phenomena. The more you do something, the more likely you're going to do it again. Okay? Neurons that fire together, wire together. Neurons that fire together, wire together. The habits that you choose to have. So, for many of the things that you do, they're not consciously, you didn't make a choice. For example, I park in the same place, even though I know our room is way down there. I keep parking in the same spot every time without thinking. I don't think, where am I going to park when I go to church? I automatically go to the same spot, even though it's illogical now. Okay? I didn't choose that. My brain is stuck in a rut. Okay? My brain, and I have to make a conscious choice to start parking more sensibly. But I'm just not thinking. I'm listening to what I'm listening to. I'm not paying attention, and my body automatically goes. Surgery gets to be like that. When you do a particular procedure over and over again, you're not thinking about what you're doing. Your brain is automatically going, and it's pre-programmed to do what it's going to do. Now, when something goes wrong, which often it does, then you think and you can fix it. Somebody starts squirting blood, you got to clamp that. We got to you got to do something about it. Okay, but a lot of what we do is predetermined by all of these factors. But sometimes you're at a fork in the road, and I talk about it all the time. That's where the free will comes in. That's where you go to do it or not to do it. To do it or not to do it. Yeah.
I think a little bit of that, when we see God, is in control of all, and I believe that He is. We're getting just a perspective from God's view. We still have choice.
Yes.
I mean, God is, from God's point of view, He knows what we're going to do.
That is exactly right. That is.
So, I mean, and it's not quite that simple, I don't think.
You are absolutely right, because we exist, let me borrow this right here. We exist, with regard to time, we exist, and C.S. Lewis was the first one that made this public, okay, that really talked about this, but I'm just going to repeat what he said, because I agree with it 100%. Okay, I thought it was very insightful. We experience time one moment at a time in linear progression. It's 10 o'clock, then it's 11 o'clock, then it's 12 o'clock, and we experience a sequence in that order. We have to follow that order. We wake up, we eat breakfast, we get, or wake up, get dressed, brush our teeth, eat breakfast. Yeah, but we do it in a linear thing, one thing at a time. Time comes at us one moment at a time. God sees the whole thing, front, back, side, in one glance. Okay? And so in terms of electing us to salvation, he sees the whole darn paper. He doesn't need to go moment to moment. He saw it. There is no, when did he see it? What do you mean? That word doesn't make any sense. When? It doesn't make sense to God. When did you see it? When? There is no when. It's a thing. It exists. Front, back, side to side. It's all there. There is no when did I decide. He's outside of time. So when the Bible says before the foundation of the earth, he decided, well, it's really, he's saying that for our benefit. There is no before with him. Okay, he's not limited to time. The only time God was limited to time was when he became and was incarnate in Christ. And then he was locked in time. And so he lost that omniscience. He gave up his omniscience when he came to earth. Okay, but omniscience for God means being outside of time. He sees you back, front, side to side, beginning and end is all there. And so the decisions that he made, I'm glad you brought that up, the decisions that he made are made outside of linear time. All right. Now, instead of Paul explaining that, he says, you know what, you're calling God unfair. Instead of explaining that whole thing about time, which, God for some reason chose not to reveal that to Paul, or maybe that was a way above his ability to explain at that time for that audience, and you can understand why it wouldn't have made any sense to them, okay? But he goes on and he says this instead. Who in the world do you think you are to second guess God? Do you for one moment suppose any of us knows enough to call God into question? You're going to judge God? You're going to say it's not fair? Think about what you're saying there. You're saying God isn't fair. Who defines right and wrong and good and bad? God, by definition, as the creator of the universe, he's the standard of good and bad and fair and unfair. He's the standard. We're in no position. How we feel is absolutely irrelevant. Okay? He is the standard. Now, if God weren't the creator of the universe, if there was something higher than God, then we could say, you know what? You're just a colonel in the army. You're violating the general's rules. Okay? But there is nobody higher. There is no standard higher. To what do you appeal when you call God bad? To what standard are you appealing? To what standard? Well, I feel. Oh, that's a really high standard right there. Ooh, how you feel. Okay, that's not going to get you anything. Okay, if you're looking for universal agreement on that, you're going to fall very short. Right? He is the standard. So regardless, I don't understand everything in the Bible. I don't. There are some things that bother me that I don't understand. Why did you do this? Are you trying to confuse us? Seriously. And I'll have to have a discussion with him when I get there. But you know what? It's not his problem. And I can be okay with that. Ultimately, he is fair, he is good, even though I don't always see it. He is the standard, and I acknowledge that. And it's one thing when we come to God, anybody that comes to him and doesn't acknowledge the godness of him is not really, it might not make it. Okay? He is God and we are not. And saying Jesus is Lord, part of that is saying, yeah, you are the standard, and I'm not. And even though, again, I don't understand. Jesus sometimes could be very condescending. All right, if you think about how he treated Nicodemus, he acted like God. He really did. And he spoke in ways that were really, he spoke graduate school to people who were freshmen sometimes as well. I think about the complexity of being God and being stuck in that teeny little brain on earth. And stuff would come out of him that was true, but in hindsight, it makes sense. But at the time, it had to come off as utter, what are you talking about? He did that. You know, we understand him because we get the big picture. But at the time, some of the stuff he said was like, are you crazy? Who would listen to this guy? You know why people listen to him? The miracles. That's it. Jesus was famous only because of the miracles. If he hadn't done those miracles and just said the things he said, they would consider him a lunatic. I guarantee if you just look at what he said, he would be considered a lunatic for the types of things he said. The only thing that got the attention, Nicodemus summed it up. It says, nobody could do what you do unless they're from God. Okay, I get that. Nicodemus got it. Okay, it's like this is just nobody can heal everybody. That's not, you know, and you know what the prevailing story in the Sanhedrin was, well, he's healing everybody because why? How is he doing it?
The devil.
Exactly. He's possessed by the king of devils. All right? He's a sorcerer. That's why they wanted him dead. And he went into the temple, on the Sabbath, and healed people on Sabbath. You're practicing sorcery on the Sabbath? In the synagogue? I mean, the indignation, that's why they plotted to kill him all the time, is that it's sorcery. He raises the dead. Sorcerer. And their literature reflects that, by the way. I mean, that rabbinical literature, if you go back and look at Mishnah and Talmud references, they called him a sorcerer. They said he deserved to die because he was a sorcerer that led Israel astray. Okay? Nobody questioned his miracles. Nobody questioned that he was fooling folks. Nobody said, no, that was the one thing. If you go back and you look at historical references to Jesus, very rarely do you find a reference to him where you don't talk about the things he did. Yeah.
Do you think because he is critical of the Jewish leadership that they fell back on that, said he's a sorcerer, to discredit him because he was putting pressure on
Oh, he was. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, well, yeah, I'm sure that was there too, because he really, and they reflect that when they go on, well, we know that you are a respecter of, before they hit him with that, shall we pay taxes to Caesar or not? But they started with, we know that you don't respect anybody. We know that you're not a respecter of anybody. So you blow us off, right? I mean, you cut us down, blow us off, and he says, what about, well, you do it to Caesar too? We'll get him because this guy doesn't respect anybody. I'll bet he doesn't respect Caesar. And if we get him to say, don't pay tax to Caesar, we can have the Romans take this guy out tomorrow. Okay? That was the plan. And so they set it up that way. We know you don't respect anybody. You don't respect the high priest. You don't respect the Pharisees. You don't respect the Sadducees. You treat us like we're nothing. Okay? So what about Caesar? What about Caesar? You don't respect him? All right. So next verse. Clay doesn't talk back to the fingers that mold it, saying, why did you shape me like this? Okay? We're the clay. And again, basically what Paul is doing is saying what I said earlier is that God is the standard. You can't go back, you can't criticize the author. That's the standard of right and wrong. Isn't it obvious that a potter has a perfect right to shape one lump of clay into a vase for holding flowers and another into a pot for cooking beans? If God needs one style of pottery, especially designed to show his angry displeasure, and another style carefully crafted to show his glorious goodness, isn't that all right? He can make whatever folks he wants for whatever reason he wants. He's God. He's the author. Now, some of you may have had experiences with angelic visitations. It doesn't happen too often in your life. It happens a lot. Then something's going on with you. You might need some mental help. But we don't get that very often. But occasionally things happen where you go, I wonder if that was an angel. Okay. One time, and I had mentioned this earlier, my car conked out on 8 Mile, and I was blocking the road, and it was on an incline, and I had a pretty big car, and I needed some help pushing it uphill so I could push it into a church parking lot. And so I'm pushing, nothing's happening, so I'm needing help. And within a minute, this girl comes jogging by, and she was about 5'2", skinny as a bean. I said, "Can I help?" And I'm going, okay, why don't you steer and I'll push. He says, no, it's okay, I'll push, you steer. I'm like, what? Yeah, go ahead, I'll push, you steer. So, okay, so I get behind there and the car's going up there. I'm going, whoa, man, she's a lot stronger than she looks. Okay, so we go up the hill, get in, and I turn around to thank her. She's gone. She's nowhere. Absolutely, there is no nothing. And I'll never forget, because I realized, like, this is like, what? Now this is, I've never experienced anything like this. Where did she go? Why did she go so fast? What happened? Okay, now the Bible does say that some of us have entertained angels unaware. And it does happen. It does happen, okay? So what that says is that some people aren't real. Sometimes the people that you run into aren't necessarily real. And you wonder, is it possible that some people are props to see what you'll do? I mean, I don't know if that's the case, but there's no way to prove that or anything. And I say that for folks that, they wonder, well, what about that, and what about that person? It's like, what matters is what you do. When we reach the fork in the road, the right thing or the easy thing, what are we going to do? It doesn't matter what somebody else did to us. It doesn't matter what somebody else is going and the choices they're making. What matters ultimately in the movie of our lives is what we do. When we are at that fork in the road, what are we going to do? We are the child of God, and we have to make a choice between the right thing and the easy thing. And the choices we make are real. The people in our world are neither here nor there. We are responsible to love the people in our world, to do the best that we can, but not get caught up on, what's God doing here, and why is this? No. They get away with it. No. That's between them and God. That's between them and God. All right. Now he goes back to the Jews. Again, the central question, what happened with the Jewish nation? Why aren't they coming to Christ? Since Jesus was Jewish, all the prophets were Jewish, everything leading up to this salvation plan was of the Jews. And the Jews are missing out on it. Why are they missing out? It says either or both happens to Jews. Either or both what? Either they get used as a cooking pot for beans or a flower pot. Either they get used for God's glory or used to demonstrate his indignation. Okay? So either or both happens to Jews. But it also happens to other people. Hosea put it well. I'll call nobodies and make them somebodies. I'll call the unloved and make them beloved. In the place where they yelled out, you're nobody, they're calling you God's living children. And here he makes reference to the Gentiles. And the Gentiles were off following foreign gods, doing all kinds of things. And then here God turns this situation around. The Messiah comes, and now Gentiles are coming to God in droves. Where Paul is going from city to city and being rejected by the synagogues, the Gentiles are saying, tell us. They're actually asking him, we want you to come talk to us about this stuff. We heard about this. Come tell us. And that's why Paul got the idea. Maybe God is sending me to these guys. Isaiah maintained the same emphasis. If each grain of sand on the seashore were numbered and the sum labeled, chosen of God, they'd be numbers still, not names. Salvation comes by personal selection. God doesn't count us. He calls us by name. Arithmetic is not his focus. Isaiah had looked ahead and spoken the truth. If our powerful God had not provided us a legacy of living children, we would have ended up like ghost towns, like Sodom and Gomorrah. All right. Now, what's he saying here? God has a wrath that's associated with our sin. And his inclination is to destroy that which is impure. Okay? That's what he has inside of him because of his perfection. He can't stand that in his sight. And so he has decided to come and save us. That's why Jesus came, to pay the penalties, to satisfy that wrath. And if he hadn't done it, nobody would make it. Absolutely nobody. There wouldn't be any Jews, wouldn't be any Gentiles, there wouldn't be anybody. And the disciples didn't quite get that when they went through, I think it was one of the Samaritan towns, and they didn't want to listen to him. And as they were leaving, the disciples came to Jesus and said, you want us to call down fire from heaven and burn them up like Sodom and Gomorrah? Because they were rude to us. Remember Jesus' response? They didn't put it in the Bible, but I would bet he rolled his eyes. And his response was, I came to save people, not to destroy them. Okay? That's not why I'm here. If I wanted to zap, I could have zapped them at any time. I came to save people, not to destroy them. All right?
Because it was in Mark there, where remember where Jesus, where Chad and what's his name, they wanted to destroy the city.
Yes, that's right. That's right. How can we sum this up? All those people who didn't seem interested in what God was doing actually embraced what God was doing as he straightened out their lives. And Israel, who seemed so interested in reading and talking about what God was doing, missed it. Okay, remember Cornelius, the centurion, sitting in his house, one day, and all of a sudden an angel appeared next to a swimming pool and said, "Hey, Cornelius, there's a guy, Peter, that you need to listen to. He's sitting over there in Joppa. So why don't you send some folks over there and get him and listen to whatever he says to you?" And that's what happened. And at the same time, Peter gets this vision where the sheet gets let down from heaven, and there's a bunch of animals on it, and a voice says, "Kill and eat." And Pete goes, "No way! I don't eat things that are not kosher." And God said, "What God has called pure, let no man call unclean." He did it 3 times, and so when those men arrived and they were Gentiles, that Peter's idea was, okay, obviously this is God saying, that the Gentiles are okay. It's okay to do that. And so he went, and that's what opened the door for the gospel to go to the Gentiles. And so it kind of a reference that here we have the Gentiles, who are not God's chosen people, getting in on it, and yet the Jews did not. Now, why did the Jews miss it so badly? How could they miss it? Because instead of trusting God, they took over. They were absorbed in what they themselves were doing. They were so absorbed in their God projects that they didn't notice God right in front of them, like a huge rock in the middle of the little road. And so they stumbled into him and went sprawling. What did they do exactly? What did they do? Well, okay, God gives them Moses, the major prophets, and the minor prophets. Okay? And their words comprise Scripture. That's what God wanted them to do. And if they just stuck to the Scriptures, they could have surmised how important faith was if they just made that their focus. But no, they had to change it a little bit. It's kind of similar what happened to early Catholicism, or later Catholicism, I should say, where they basically decided that you can't read the Bible on your own, you need to go through a priest. Okay, well, they kind of did the same thing in Judaism. So they developed oral tradition. The Mishnah and those guys, those are the writings of the rabbis. So basically it's called oral tradition. And so the idea was, Moses wrote a bunch of stuff down, but he said a lot of stuff too. And the rabbis around him, they wrote down all the stuff that he said. And so that is passed on. That's what you get in the Mishnah record and so forth. There's a record of the oral tradition of things that Moses said, but he didn't write down. Well, how do you know Moses said it? Oh, because Rabbi Doodleboo said it. Okay, and he knew him, and it goes back like that. And so you end up with volumes and volumes and volumes of things that older rabbis had said that some other rabbi had said that Moses had said. Okay, and so we have all these extra rules and extra laws. And over time, they came to value those rabbinical rules as more valid than the Scripture themselves. Okay, so you end up with things like, whereas in the Old Testament, in the Bible, it says, honor your father and mother. I mean, right there in the Ten Commandments, and if you don't do it, then you can stone them. It's very severe on what happened. Well, in the Mishnah it says, if you're a rabbi, if you're a Pharisee, if you're of a rabbinical order, you don't have to honor your father or mother. You don't have to financially support them when they get too old. You can tell them, whatever I would have given to you is korban. In other words, that's a service to God, because I work for God directly. So all my money is for God, and you don't get any, and it's okay. It's okay because of that. They also made up other rules, like, for example, ceremonial washing your hands, ceremonial when you get up in your little rituals. You can undo your sins that way. Okay, because they made it so that getting to heaven was a balancing beam. You got your bad deeds and your good deeds. Okay, so what are good deeds that make up to the bad deeds? Ceremonial washings, okay? Ceremonial this, ceremonial that. And so by doing ceremony, enough of it, you can undo all your bad deeds and get right with God. And those are things that are Mishnah related, okay? Other things include, in terms of who's your neighbor, love your neighbor. Who's your neighbor? Fellow Pharisees. People who are not of rabbinical order don't count so much. Okay, and that's why you can go on, walk on the other side of the road. If you see a Samaritan there, you can ignore them because they're not your brother, they're not a real person. You get the idea? And so these are things that Jesus, that's why he was so hard on them. He says that you have many sayings like this. Jesus is really critical. And he was aware of the Mishnah. He was aware of that. And he says, you people have many sayings. These aren't from God. This is you people, basically you're so concerned about your Jewishness, these rules, and doing such a good job and so focused on how much better you are than other people that you totally missed God on this. And that's what has happened here. All right, this is Isaiah 28. I'm talking about the going astray of Israel. Energy and insights of justice to those who guide and decide. Strength and prowess to those who guard and protect. These also, the priest and prophet. Now they had prophet schools, their prophets. So these aren't God's prophets. These are rabbinically appointed prophets who go to prophet school. Okay, so they haven't done any miracles. They haven't predicted anything. These are rabbinical prophets. Anyway. All right, so these also, the priest and prophet, stagger from drink, weaving, falling down drunks, besotted with wine and whiskey, can't see straight, can't talk sense. Every table is covered with vomit. They live in vomit. I don't think he's literal here. I don't think they were all alcoholics. I think he's describing how disgusted he was with the traditions that they have. So I'm just saying. Is that say? And so now, and so these rabbinical leaders are angry with the prophet here, and he says, "Is that so? And who do you think you are to teach us? Who are you to lord it over us? We're not babies in diapers to be talked down to by such as you. Da da da, blah blah blah. That's a good little girl. It's a good little boy." But that's exactly how you will be addressed. God will speak to this people in baby talk, one syllable at a time, and he'll do it through foreign oppressors. He said before, this is the time and place to rest and to give rest to the weary. This is the place to lay down your burden. But they won't listen. So God will start over with the simple basics and address them in baby talk, one syllable at a time. Da da blah blah blah. That's a good little girl. That's a good little boy. And like toddlers, they will get up and fall down and get bruised and confused and lost. Now listen to God's message, you scoffers who rule this people in Jerusalem. You say, we've taken out good life insurance, we've hedged all our bets, covered all our bases, no disaster can touch us. We've thought of everything. We're advised by the experts. We're set. Who are those experts they're advised by? All those rules, all that oral tradition. They follow those enough and they're good enough. God has to protect them because they're so good. They're so good. Okay, they got God's blessing because they follow all these oral traditions. Therefore, this is what the sovereign Lord says. Look, I am placing a foundation stone in Jerusalem, a firm and tested stone. It is a precious cornerstone that is safe to build on. Whoever believes need never be shaken. Now, who is that cornerstone? Anybody know what that cornerstone? Yeah, exactly. That was revealed later. That was Jesus said over and over again. This is me. This is me right here. Okay? I will test you with the measuring line of justice and the plumb line of righteousness. Since your refuge is made of lies, a hailstorm will knock it down. Since it's made of deception, a flood will sweep it away. I will cancel the bargain you made to cheat death, and I will overturn your deal to dodge the grave. When the terrible enemy sweeps through, you will be trampled into the ground. Again and again that flood will come, morning after morning, night, day and night, until you are carried away. Okay? So that's the Old Testament references to what was going to happen. And until 1948, that is what happened to them. Okay? And even where they developed large settlements, bad things tended to happen. It's amazing they're still around because that sticking to those lies, to the deceptions that they were hanging on to. Okay? Isaiah again gives us the metaphor for this pulling this together. Careful, I've put a large stone on the road to Mount Zion, a stone you can't get around, but the stone is me. If you're looking for me, you'll find me on the way, not in the way. Okay, now that's it for Romans chapter 9. But any questions on that? Yeah.
It almost hesitate to ask the question, but Jewish people have had a lot of persecution over the years.
Yes.
Is some of that foretold by that, what you just read in Isaiah?
I think so. I think so, because they really, I mean, when you think about, I can't think of any race that has experienced more persecution from foreigners than the Jewish race. When you think about the pogroms, when you think about what happened in Arabia, with Muhammad decimating huge populations there, and then the Holocaust, and you go, wow, I mean, over and over and over again. And it's like this right here says, this is God's baby talk way of saying, no, you're not doing right. No, I'm not blessed. No, all the way. Okay, and it's until we get to the end times, and in the end times there is going to be, according to Revelation, an awakening of the Jewish nation at that time, and that might be what we're leading up to now. When C.S. Lewis wrote Mere Christianity, it was the first time that apologetics was presented to the general public. And he made some very, very good cases. Do you know what the trilemma is? Lunatic, exactly. It was first presented in a series of radio talks that C.S. Lewis did on the BBC, and then to the nation during the Second World War. And then later it was comprised into the book Mere Christianity. And his premise was, and he assumed that everybody was familiar with the Bible, okay? And he makes the comment that anyone, some people, there were many people saying, yeah, I believe Jesus was a good moral teacher, but he wasn't God. I don't believe this nonsense about him being divinity, but he was a good guy. And that was a prevalent idea. And his comment was, anybody that says the sorts of things that Jesus said could not have been a good, normal guy. Okay? When he says, I am the bread of life, I am the Father are one. No one can come to the Father but through me. No one will judge. The Father judges no one, but has entrusted all judgment to the Son, in order that all may honor the Son, just as they honor the Father. When you say stuff like that, that's not normal. Okay? And so his point was, if he wasn't God, then either he was wicked and he was trying to get people to worship him as God, which is what the Jewish position was, or he was a lunatic. He had a pretty nasty form of schizophrenia. And I've never seen schizophrenia on that level, though, because with schizophrenia, the delusions change over time. They don't usually, not just one delusion. It's one day you're God, one day you're Satan kind of a thing. So even that doesn't fit. But he said his point was he'd be on the level of a man who says he's a poached egg. So that's all. Those are the only choices you have. Well, later, even many Christian apologists disagreed with him, and he got a lot of correction mail saying, you know what, there's another position that you have not addressed. What if Jesus did not have all these miracles? He was a normal guy. He was wrong. He was sincere. He thought he was some kind of messenger, but he was just wrong. But he was sincere, and he did a lot of good, but he was sincerely wrong. And then the disciples or later authors built him up and turned him into this Messiah by writing false things about him, and that's what we have in the Bible, a false record of his life. And so at the bottom of this false record there is the historic Jesus, but that's not the real Jesus, because over time legends built up, and that's what the New Testament reflects, legends. And so he got a lot of flack for not including that. Well, there's a problem with that idea. At that time, C.S. Lewis probably couldn't have defended it because some material wasn't really fully to light yet, such as what we now know about the Dead Sea Scrolls. Okay, since that time, because back in those days, the earliest manuscripts of the New Testament were about 400 years after the fact. And so there was time for legend to build up. However, since that time, we have a lot more manuscripts, and many of them are quite early. And the earliest manuscript, the John Rylands manuscript, for example, dates to about 120 AD. That's in the lifetimes of contemporaries of the apostles themselves. And from the writings of the early church fathers, you can recreate practically the whole New Testament. And they're in the early 2nd century. Okay? So there was no time for legend to build up. We have manuscripts that go back too early. It would be like somebody trying to tell us today that John F. Kennedy really wasn't assassinated. Okay? It's like, wait a minute, there's too much, it's too not that long ago. We've known people in our lifetimes that were alive during the time of Lincoln, in our lifetimes, okay? So there's too much overlap here. You can't pass a big lie off when we're that close to it in history, and that's the problem. We have manuscripts that go back too early for legend to have built up. If there was a lie about Jesus, the apostles themselves would have to be the perpetrators. They would have to be. They would have to be, okay? Given the early nature of the manuscripts that we have. Now, all the apostles, as far as we know, except John, died for their beliefs. John was boiled in oil and later died in exile on the island of Patmos. But other ones, I mean, you know, as you take a look at, you know, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, and you take a look at Paul, take a look at Peter. Peter was crucified upside down. Thomas was run through by a spear in India. Bartholomew, they flayed him alive. They peeled his skin off in strips. Okay? All they had to do was say, I made the story up. And they didn't. Okay? So yet one idea is, well, why would you die for something you know to be a lie? That doesn't make any sense at all. People do jihad for things they believe in, not for lies they made up. In contrast, take a look at Joseph Smith, the founder of the Mormons. His 3 witnesses that supposedly saw the magic plates with him, they later totally recanted and said it was all bull. Okay? And then he kicked them out of the Mormon church. Why that's still going on, I have no idea. Okay? But yeah, all of their witnesses have recanted. They not only didn't die, they confessed the truth. But not so with the 12 apostles. Okay? So we have their witness. But in addition, in the Mishnah, which is we have the writings of the rabbis of that time period. Okay? Now, what's interesting is that what these people are saying is that the story of the miracles was made up. Jesus was a regular Joe, and there were no miracles. Well, his enemies would say different. Listen to what really they hate Jesus. Okay, I'm telling you that right now. In these writings, they have utter hatred for Jesus of Nazareth. And this is what they say about him. Okay, there are several Talmudic passages that are said to be referring to Jesus. Okay, I'll start here. Our rabbis taught Jesus the Nazarene had 5 disciples, and these are Mattai, Nakai, Netzer, Buni, and Tuda. I have no idea where they got these names. Okay. It could be Matthew, but all the rest of them are off, so they didn't know. Okay. The master said, Jesus the Nazarene practiced magic and deceived and led Israel astray. So here they are. These are his enemies, saying this guy did magic, and he was a deceiver. He led Israel astray. That is totally consistent with what the New Testament said. Okay? Jesus, son of Stata, is Jesus son of Pandira? So there's a question that's being asked. Now it's important to know that Stata is a word for a male Gentile. Okay? So remember, Jesus was virgin birth, right? Well, they didn't like that story. No. In fact, they called, remember in John chapter 8, Jesus was called, we're not born of fornication like you know. So the idea was, well, you know, we know that your father isn't your father, therefore Mary was not a good person. So Pandira is a woman who commits adultery. Okay? So Rev Hizda says the husband was Stata and the lover was Pandira. But was not the husband Pappos, son of Yehuda, and the mother Stata? No, his mother was Miriam, who let her hair grow long and was called Stata. Pambita says about her, she was unfaithful to her husband. So they're like, you know, he practiced sorcery, and he was the product of an adulterous relationship. On Sabbath Eve and the eve of Passover, Jesus the Nazarene was hanged, and a herald went forth before him 40 days heralding, Jesus the Nazarene is going forth to be stoned because he practiced sorcery and instigated and seduced Israel to idolatry. Whoever knows anything in his defense may come and state it. Now, what are they saying here? Okay, now people knew that, you guys, because the word got out. I mean, we're in the 1st century. This story went all over the world. And so what the rabbis are saying, hey, don't blame us for killing him unjustly. We gave him a fair trial. It says, we gave him 40 days. We let everybody, we're having a trial for Jesus. Anybody has anything to say in his defense, come. And so they're telling this whopper that they gave him 40 days and nobody came to his defense. That's the whopper that they're saying here. Okay? But since they did not find anything in his defense, they hanged him on Sabbath Eve, the eve of Passover. And so this is so what they're telling this to other rabbis. This is the story. Somebody tells you about Jesus, let him know it's not our fault. He deserved to die. He was practicing magic. He was practicing sorcery. That sorcery thing, okay? You're not supposed to be practicing sorcery, and he did that. Ula says, do you suppose that Jesus the Nazarene was one for whom a defense could be made? He was a messet. What's a messet? Somebody who messes up people. Okay. All right. He's someone who instigates Israel to idolatry. All right. And to this day, you talk to a rabbi today, and they will tell you, we cannot accept Jesus because he was an idolater. All right, he was accepting worship for himself, calling himself Son of God. That is idolatry. Okay, so should be showing mercy, show him no compassion, and do not shield him. With Jesus of the Nazarene, it was different, for he was close to the government. Now, what does that mean? Well, one of the questions that people had when Jesus went to the temple and would be speaking in public, they said, "Why aren't they arresting him? He's speaking in public." Well, he's close to the government. That's what the deal was. That's why they didn't arrest him, because he's a Democrat. All right. Now, Sanhedrin 43 relates the trial and execution of a sorcerer named Jesus and his 5 disciples. The sorcerer is stoned and hanged on at the eve of Passover. Sanhedrin 107 tells of Jesus offended by his teacher for paying too much attention to the innkeeper's wife. Jesus wished to be forgiven, but his rabbi was too slow to forgive him, and Jesus, in despair, went away and put a brick idol and put up a brick idol and worshipped it. So they're calling him, he was not only hitting on the innkeeper's wife, adultery, but then he's an idol worshiper. So these are stories about him. And then this last one, which I guess is the big one here, what happened to Jesus when he died? Well, now they tell you about the aftermath. Here in Gittin 56b is a story mentioned in which Ankylos summons up the spirit of Yeshu who sought to harm Israel. He describes his punishment in the afterlife as boiling in excrement. And so not only did we kill him for a good reason because he practiced sorcery, now he's boiling in doo-doo forever and ever. Okay? So, now what's interesting here is clearly they don't like Jesus. But yet, what's his crime? Sorcery. Practicing magic. All right, now, if their story is true, if these guys saying, Jesus was just a normal Joe and a legend built up, why are his enemies accusing him of practicing sorcery? That's what made Jesus famous, were the miracles. Even his enemies admitted the miracles cannot be refuted. Nobody has ever opened the eyes of someone born blind. No sorcerer ever brought somebody back from the dead. Jesus did all this. He healed everybody. He had crowds of 6,000 and 7,000 because he healed everybody. They had no explanation except he's a sorcerer. So again, going back to that liar, Lord, lunatic, the other arm of that, the other possibility is absurd. When even your enemies say you did miracles, you got to accept this guy was doing miracles. There was a Jesus. He was around. He led Israel astray, if you will, because of the miracles. Even his enemies said that. So when the critics claim that there was no Jesus doing miracles, that he was just a deluded rabbi, that is not supported by the historical record at all. Okay?